For me, it all started here. Parks Department Field number 2 from Backyard Baseball 2001. Used the draft to pick as many power hitters as I possibly could and then swing for the fences. And it didn't have to be at the Parks Department either. I was also a huge fan of trying to hit home runs into the pool at Steel Stadium, as well as over the high right field fence at Playground Commons. This game has so many interesting settings and gameplay mechanics that it didn't really matter that much where you chose to play. Even at the objectively terrible Sandy Flats, this game still holds up nearly 25 years after its initial release. Am I blinded by nostalgia and talking about it? Of course, but that doesn't mean I'm wrong. With its intuitive gameplay, fun characters, and incorporation of real-life players and teams, Backyard Baseball, and really the entire Backyard series in general, was an excellent introduction to sports games for thousands of people around my age. And since the 1970s, whether it's Ken Griffey Jr. Baseball, FIFA, or even Pong, every generation of sports nerds seems to have a game like that. Sports video games generate tens of billions of dollars in revenue every year, and because there's a strong correlation between sports fandom and people who play sports games, that number is only going to go up as more sports become more popular in more places. But what I'm interested in is less the numbers themselves and more the reason behind why people play these games in the first place. People have been playing sports video games for over 40 years, way before you could ever do a realistic rookie draft or create your own playbook inside the game. Regardless of their format or sophistication level, the main appeal of sports video games is that you can put yourself inside the action. That starts with arcade games like Sega's Grand Prix, which was released in 1969 and featured a functioning steering wheel and foot pedal. But the really important breakthrough was Pong, which debuted in 1972 and not only put people into the game, which was essentially a virtual version of ping pong, but also let them do it from the comfort of their own home. In his book Atari Age, Wisconsin-Milwaukee professor Michael Newman describes how Pong was successful in the long term because it kept people engaged. It also provided the template for Atari and other companies to make a bunch of sports games like it afterwards. By the end of the 1970s, there were games featuring all kinds of sports, from bowling to motocross to games with way more moving parts like football and baseball. But it wasn't until the console wars in the 1980s that what we recognize today as sports games really started to be a thing. I'm skipping over a bunch of stuff for the sake of time, but the dramatic acceleration in the quality of sports video games, specifically those that were coming out on consoles, was largely down to two things, both of which you're probably familiar with: EA and AI. Before they became everyone's favorite punching bag, Electronic Arts were one of the most innovative and forward-thinking video game companies out there, especially when it came to sports games. Within about a 7-year period, EA released the first versions of Earl Weaver Baseball, still regarded as one of the greatest baseball games of all time, Madden, NBA Live, FIFA, and a number of other franchises that would dominate the sports game industry for the next several decades. Their use of new AI technology made their games feel way more like the sports they were designed to emulate, and their use of stat tracking and real-life player integration, among other things, gave users an immersive experience that no one had even been able to come close to up to that point. And although graphics and gameplay mechanics have improved in leaps and bounds in the 30-ish years since, that immersion and the effects it can have on our brains is what I really want to focus on. Let me begin this part by saying that this is not a video about gaming in general. The only type of game I'm really talking about here is your classic sports simulation game. There's actually been a lot more research done on the mental effects of things like RPGs, first-person shooters, and online multiplayer games, and even in the sports world, a lot of the studies have been focused on things like esports and the mechanics of daily fantasy sports leagues. We don't really know exactly how these specific types of games affect your brain, and as both a researcher and a person who plays them basically every day, that seems to me like a gap in the knowledge base that's worth trying to fill. In 2018, YouTube legend Mark Rober gave a TED Talk where he discussed how playing Super Mario Bros. Mimics the frustrating yet rewarding nature of real-world problem-solving in a consequence-free environment. The whole talk is great, and I'll put a link to it in the description. But in my mind, there's a direct parallel between what he talks about in that video and what I believe is the main benefit behind playing sports video games. What if we could trial and error our own theories about sports in that same consequence-free environment? What if there were a player that you'd always wanted to see your favorite team bring in? What if you wanted to test out a new soccer formation, or relocate a team to your hometown? Sports games allow you to do all of those things, plus a bunch of others, while also removing the logistical and financial hurdles that would prevent them from happening in real life, as well as the ramifications that might come from the experiment going poorly. Put another way, sports video games allow us, both literally and figuratively, to play. You might think you know what the word play means, and to a certain extent you're probably right, but there's a lot more going on in the brain when we play than you might realize. In his 2010 book, appropriately titled Play, Dr. Stuart Brown resists the urge to define play outright, and instead gives a list of characteristics that play usually entails in both humans and animals. From the outside, it might seem kind of weird for someone to spend an entire weekend meticulously constructing the perfect virtual version of a real team, but if you're the one playing, you don't really notice how much time is passing. All you want to do is keep going, because for reasons that you yourself might have difficulty explaining, you're having fun, and you want to see this thing through to the end. But what I want to talk about most are these two right here, starting with play's apparent purposelessness, and how that specifically relates to sports video games. If you're like me, and you've spent quite a lot of your life with a controller in your hands, you've probably heard someone tell you that you're wasting time, or that what you're doing is pointless. But this definition of play would tell you that nothing could be further from the truth. Whether it's playing a sport, or doing a puzzle, or taking your favorite team to the promised land, play like this has a purpose, and it's worth talking about what that is. Let's start with the brain. According to Stuart Brown's book, there's a direct relationship between how much a young animal plays and the degree to which their frontal cortex, the part of your brain largely associated with what we call cognition, is able to develop. Across the animal kingdom, children use play, both individually and in groups, to learn how to organize their thoughts, determine what information is relevant and what isn't, and how to plan for the future. I would argue that playing Madden 2004 helped me do all of that, and then some. And I know some of you will be thinking that there are also plenty of pitfalls to kids playing lots of video games, and you're right, but in the right environment, sports games can be a way to play well and give your brain what it needs to grow and develop new neural connections, both for children and adults. Brown's book mentions that adults don't play as much as kids do, which is kind of a shame, but is understandable when you factor in all the time we have to spend doing adult stuff. But grown-ups still need to play sometimes too. Not engaging periodically in activities that we consider to be playful can have an impact on our mood and productivity, as well as our ability to problem solve. Without having play to expand our mental boundaries and creativity, we can get stuck in the same thought patterns and mental sets with no way to get out of them. Sports video games give us the chance to try things out or explore new ideas within the confines of a system that we're familiar with, or even to use them to learn about an entirely new concept from the comfort of our own homes. I'm a big fan of world football now, but I haven't always been. Like a lot of other Americans, one of the most impactful ways that I got to know that world was through FIFA. You could say that all those hours I spent looking at the stats of players from around the world that I wanted to sign for my virtual team would have been better spent elsewhere, but I disagree. I was having a great time playing and learning, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now professionally, on YouTube or otherwise, if those hours hadn't happened. Sports games also have an extremely high degree of improvisational potential because they have so many realistic and expansive features that allow players to be creative, while also providing a safe environment to explore them in. In real life, we experience uncertainty and randomness all the time, but whether they're helping or hurting us, we have absolutely no control over them. A big part of what makes something playful is that there's no actual threat of something going wrong. Many sports games have mechanics where players have to navigate things like player contracts or salary caps, but they're not actually responsible for the fictional money they're managing. If they try an in-game strategy and it doesn't work at all, nobody's livelihood is on the line for that not going well. Players are encouraged to improvise and try innovative things because, like in Mark Rober's Super Mario example, there's no penalty for them not working. And I think that's pretty neat, and a big part of me wonders what would happen if more teams embraced that kind of mentality in real life. I've talked about this before, but most front offices are incredibly risk-averse, mostly because of the potential consequences of doing anything too crazy. But games encourage that creativity by removing those consequences pretty much altogether. My question is, why don't more teams adopt a more play-based approach in how they run themselves? Their entire business is based off of a game, after all. Why not try to make your sport more like a video game rather than just the other way around? Shouldn't we want to do things like encouraging creativity and ways to find new solutions? We have well-documented examples of teams all across the sports spectrum doing essentially just that, and finding success that goes well beyond what their means should allow them to. And if you're on the other end of that, which is going to be the overwhelming majority of us, I hope this video has brought you a little bit of insight into what's actually happening when you fire up your console to play 2K. Whether we're playing by ourselves, playing online, or playing with a group, sports games provide players with an opportunity to enrich their minds. But there's also the idea that sports video games, for the most part, are just fun to play. Having fun also has a lot of social and emotional benefits that shouldn't be discounted. Sometimes you just want to play NFL Blitz with the fellas for a few hours, and that's perfectly alright. As I mentioned earlier, my journey into sports games started with a combination of backyard baseball, NBA Live, and a few others. And I remember the gameplay and trying to win things and stuff like that, but what I remember more is the freedom they gave me to screw around. I did fantasy drafts and made creative players and built fictional stadiums, not because I thought that was the way the game was supposed to be played, but because I could. I truly believe that these games have become so deeply and intricately designed that there's something in there for every type of brain to explore and enjoy. So to cap off this love letter to sports video games, here's my final plea to their developers. Please do not do any more to the souls of these games, at least no more than you already have, for the sake of making more money. I know that career modes and creation features don't give you as much as those sweet online microtransactions, but they give your games depth and an opportunity to be used as something more than just a cash cow. When all this started, back in the late 80s and early 90s, what made you guys special was that with all the revolutionary AI tech and realistic game modes and roster integration, you were playing while designing your games as much as we were actually playing them on our consoles. Sports games allow the opportunity to put yourself into the game, but that only works if the game feels as sincere as the real thing. No matter what age you are, if you're a sports fan that plays video games, chances are that you have a favorite game in this category. And on the heels of watching this video, I would encourage you to think about why it's your favorite, and then put that reason down in the comments below. We can turn this into our own unofficial scientific study, the results of which I can then publish in a subsequent video project. We can add to the understanding of how these games work simply by documenting our own experiences, which may then lead someone else to pick up the same question, which then leads someone else to do the same, and on until we have a better understanding of how and why sports video games have become so popular. Until then, though, we can only try and keep putting the pieces together ourselves. And, of course, keep on playing. Hi everyone, my name is Will, and this is my channel, Student of the Game, where we do videos on sports psychology and culture. This video was just as much about nostalgia as it was about science for me, and for all the great video games I mentioned, barely even scratched the surface of all the games I could have talked about. MVP Baseball 2005, NCAA football, even NASCAR Chase for the Cup. They all got a couple 100 hours on my GameCube, and I wouldn't trade any of that time away if I had the chance. If you like the video, please do let me know by subscribing to the channel or even giving to the Patreon, just linked in the description. Leave your favorite sports game in the comments section below, and I'll try to reply to as many of them as I can. But for now, gotta go. See you next time.